Okay, Jai Hind, everybody. Uh, I don't know how many of you would have noticed the recent turmoil which has taken place in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And normally we have been having a specific topic based, sessions in a particular month. But we have planned at least one Thursday should be devoted to those topics which emerge out of the blue and which are very important to us. So PoK, doesn't require any further elaboration as to how and why it is important. There are various schools of thought. One school of thought advocating that we must consider, its integration in India by force. Government approval for PoK being our integral part, including Gilgit and Baltistan, already exists. But there are pros and cons whether it is going to be possible or not. Nobody knows. But in last 2 to 3 years, there has been another thought which has been making waves, that the way the people of PoK is being suppressed by Pakistani establishment, and they are not getting their own voice, and a lot of basic needs and other things are also getting adversely affected. The public there may be themselves, at some point of time may opt for join Jammu and Kashmir, and that in any case is part of India as the instrument of accession of 1947. So we are privileged to have Dr. Prateek Joshi with us, who is a known expert on PoK, Pakistan in general and PoK in particular, who will take us to the various shades, especially in the light of turmoils which we are seeing now. So before he starts his deliberation, I request Ashika to introduce the speaker.
Dr. Prateek Joshi is an experienced researcher and policy consultant specializing in national security, geopolitics, and strategic communications. He holds a PhD in global and imperial history from the University of Oxford, where his doctoral research analyzed the geopolitical transition from the British Empire to an independent India. He earned a master's in international relations from South Asian University and a bachelor's economics honors from the University of Delhi. His academic expertise is further highlighted by his time as a tutor at Stanford University, where he taught undergraduate courses on Cold War, nuclear politics, and US-China relations. In his professional career, Dr. Prateek has spent over 8 years working at the intersection of prominent think tanks and high-level government initiatives. He currently operates as an independent strategic communications consultant, collaborating with India's National Security Council, following a tenure as a media advisor on the Buddhist desk for the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. His prior institutional experience includes serving as a research associate at the South Asia desk of the Vivekananda International Foundation and as a consultant with the MP IDSA. Outside of his policy work, Dr. Prateek is a professionally trained classical musician and is multilingual with proficiency in English, Hindi, Urdu, and reading proficiency in Persian. Welcome.
So, Smriti, when you may have some, common issue to talk with him, after the, this formal talk gets over.
No problems.
Okay. So, Ali was take now.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much for the opportunity to Jenny, sir, and CENJOWS. Small introduction on why I also got interested in PoK. I did my master's from South Asian University, and we had many students from PoK because it was part of the SARC project. And whenever they had to take their get their passports signed by the FRRO office, they would always come out saying कि PoK क्या होता है, हम तो गिलगित में रहते हैं. So that would have an intense debate that we call it PoK. You may be from Gilgit Baltistan or say Muzaffarabad, but India officially calls the region PoK. And my PhD heavily draws from the archives available on what the NEA was thinking and what our military establishment of the day was thinking about PoK. I'll start with the issue first. Where does the crisis lie? And I'll take you on a 7-decade journey on how exactly the political sentiment has evolved in the region. So we can make a sense of the present situation and how do the people of PoK conduct their politics and what is their take on political identity. Where do they locate themselves between India, their native area and Pakistan. So the specific problem, as we see, is civic issues, elitism by the ruling elite of PoK, and most important issue being the 12 seats that we all must have come across that this. So the legislature in the PoK region has 53 seats, out of which 45 are directly elected and 8 are proportional representation seats. Out of those 45 seats, we have 12 seats that are reserved for the refugees. Refugees means people who are categorized as refugees from Jammu and Kashmir, but who are not living in PoK, who are living in Karachi, Rawalpindi, Islamabad. They are the ones who are electing the 12 representatives. Now, the is out of those 12 seats, the seats are 12, but the total voters on those 12 seats are 4.5 lakh or 4.7 lakh voters. Out of those 4.7 lakh voters, so the seats, the 12 seats are divided into 6 seats for Jammu refugees, 6 seats for Kashmir refugees. The 6 seats for Kashmir refugees, can you imagine the number of voters? 30,000. So eventually you have 30,000 Kashmiris who may not be Kashmiris, who could be Punjabis, masquerading as Kashmiris. They have the right to elect 6 representatives. And the problem is whoever rules Islamabad is able to influence those 12 seats. So imagine you have 45 directly elected seats, 12 seats are for the refugees. Whenever the government has to carry out some hit job, they have to change the ruling party there. They simply get those 12 members to come and play spoilsport. So this is where everything starts from. Now, I'll discuss the recent protests. So it's being carried out by the people who are spearheading these protests are Joint Awami Action Committee. Now, who are these people? It was established in 2023, but what is the tradition of protests in the area? And I'll also go a step ahead to also make this claim that where we have missed the bus because we were so busy, and I'm not trying to blame anyone, but because the Kashmir, but because the crisis in the Indian Kashmir was so intense because of the militancy, because of the propaganda by the Pakistanis, we forgot to understand that there was a more serious crisis that was in the making in the PoK region, and I'll tell you why. So let's go back to 1930s, where political identity is about to be established in Jammu and Kashmir. 1930s, you have the Maharaj of Jammu Kashmir, you have the Dogra Empire, which is controlling the entire state. What happens in 1931? There are many instances. Now, 1920s is a time when the Muslim League is rapidly expanding into Punjab. And if you see the map of Jammu and Kashmir, the western Jammu is bordering Punjab. So the Muslim League sentiment, which is on the rise in Punjab, that starts seeping into Jammu and Kashmir. And suddenly the Muslim League leaders from Punjab, they are constantly trying to pin the subjects of the Muslim subjects of Jammu and Kashmir. कि आपके साथ तो ज़्यादती हो रही है. So you need to rise up. So this is where everything starts. Now in 1931, you have some instances where there is the desecration of the holy book of the Muslims. Then you have an imam who's being prevented from giving some statement by the police. Now, whether they are true or not, but these two stories and these two instances become very big in Jammu. And they spread all the way to Kashmir. And there is a butler who comes with a British bureaucrat. He's not a Kashmiri, he's not from Jammu, but he mobilizes the entire population of Jammu and Kashmir, saying that something wrong is happening with you. And this is where political identity comes into being in that region, which is fanned by the Muslim League sentiment. The second thing which is going on in 1930s, I hope I'm not overloading you with a lot of. The second thing which is going on in Jammu and Kashmir is, again, coming from Punjab, there is a very, very strong anti-Ahmadi sentiment which is in the making in Punjab. Because the Ahmadis and the Arya Samajis are fighting, who's better. And that's where the anti-Ahmadi Deobandi movement is also seeping into Punjab's bordering districts and entering into Kashmir. So collectively, you have anti-Ahmadism, anti-Dogra sentiment, and the Punjabi clerical establishment, along with the Sufi shrines of Punjab, which are very close to the Muslim League. So you have a forefront war which is going on against the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. And this is where he's literally cornered and he has no way to. So he's gradually giving some concessions to the subjects of Jammu and Kashmir. He's actively thinking about education for not just the Hindus, but he's equally thinking about what best I can do for the Muslims of my state. But it's too late by 1940s, where you have the Congress and the Muslim League, which are locking horns. And now, when it comes to the political identity of Kashmir, Mr. Jinnah plays a trump card which helps him, which also damages the cause of Pakistan at the same time. Now, if you remember, the Indian nationalist leadership is dead against the princes. And they say, ye to feudal hai, ye to chor hai, they represent an old order. They should be kicked out. And because the Indian nationalists are against the princes, and they are saying that the princes have no right to sign the instrument of accession as an independent state. Either they go with Pakistan or they go with India. That is the legal point they give. But you have Mr. Jinnah who's saying कि ये तो possible नहीं है. They have the right to choose independence, and that is where he's in some sort of a strategic alignment with the princely state, saying that because Kashmir is a state, it's a princely state, and because the subjects of Kashmir are being oppressed, that's what the claim he makes. So they need independence, and this is where the Muslim League and the local parties of Jammu and Kashmir who are pro-Pakistan, they have a clash. So in Jammu and Kashmir, you have two major parties. If you recall, you have the National Conference, which is still headed by the Abdullah family, it's controlled by Abdullah family. And taking back to 1930s, as I told you, that there was a big revolt against the Maharaja by the Muslim subjects in Jammu, followed by certain incidents in Kashmir. In the 1930s, you have a new party that comes up, it's called the Muslim Conference. But then one part of Muslim Conference is convinced by the Indian nationalist leadership that you should come with India and you should rename your party. So one faction of Muslim Conference is renamed into National Conference. But the remaining faction of Muslim Conference, which is the original Muslim Conference, that allies with the Pakistani movement. And this is where a big fight starts, where you have on one hand Sheikh Abdullah trying to create a idea where he says, okay, I want to associate with India, but he does not clarify that whether he's an Indian, whether he's a Kashmiri, but he says, okay, my future lies with India, without clarifying whether I'm an Indian or not. On the other hand, you have the Muslim Conference, which says that our future lies with the Pakistan, but there are two factions. One that calls for clear merger of Jammu and Kashmir into Pakistan, and one calls for a sort of independent status. But ठीक है कि पाकिस्तान के साथ हम अपना काम चला देंगे. That's the Muslim Conference. Where now all the way to 1947, you have those two factions who are fighting with each other. And the fight is so intense that Mr. Jinnah is called in mid-1940s, to have some sort of the agreement and to stop fighting. But then Mr. Jinnah is literally forced to leave Kashmir. The fight between these two, factions is so intense. But coming to 1947, you have something more. How many of you are familiar with, obviously, I know one person from Jammu and Kashmir who's my former colleague, but there's a place called Poonch. Poonch in Jammu and Kashmir. So in Poonch is a semi-independent entity within the broader Dogra state. So Jammu and Kashmir to Thai pura, but then you have a Poonch Jagir. And the ruler of Poonch is a cousin of the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. The problem is that Poonch has majority Muslims. The ruler of Poonch is Hindu, similarly like the broader Jammu and Kashmir state. And 1946, 1947, the phase is the call for independence is going. And the Second World War has ended. Now imagine Poonch and the adjoining areas alone, they sent 50,000 soldiers to fight in the Second World War. So you literally have battle-hardened mercenaries, battle-hardened soldiers who return back from the Second World War. They are very much agitated because they are promised certain concessions by the Dogra Empire, that since you have participated and since you have some contributions, so we will give you some concessions and benefits. But something different happens. There are more taxes which are imposed on Poonch. And the Raja of Punch, Raja Jagatdev Singh, is pressured by his bigger cousin, Maharaja Hari Singh. And that is where you have something called the Punch Rebellion. So you have battle-hardened soldiers from that area who come back. Secondly, you have some problem from the Raja of Punch who's feeling pressured from the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. And third, you have the Muslim League and the Muslim Conference who are already angry, who don't want the Maharaja to continue. So all these three pressures kind of double down on the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And in 47, you have something called the Punch Rebellion, where thousands of these people, they rise up against Maharaja. And the situation is so serious that the Maharaja decides to, in July 1947, the Maharaja decides to of that area. He's murdered. He was about to be killed. And this is written by the Prime Minister of Maharaja. There is a book on Jammu and Kashmir by Meherchand Mahajan, who was the last Prime Minister of, after Ramchandra Kaki became the last Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. He's written a fantastic book on what happens in that phase. So, and then the rebellion in Punch is supported by the Pashtun invasion that we all have read, that how the Pakistanis connived to mobilize the Pashtuns from not only FATA, but the entire NWFP. And even they mobilized the Maulvis of Kabul. So in fact, the entire Pashtun belt was riled up against the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. And what becomes the reason, besides the political reason, when the riots, when the partition riots start in Punjab, the first thing that happens is there is a big massacre in Rawalpindi, where thousands of Sikhs are murdered, and that's something which our history does not acknowledge somehow. I don't know why. It's yet to come into our narrative. And that is as a result, because there are thousands of killings between the two major religions. A narrative is perpetuated by the Muslim League in the Pashtun majority areas कि अगर ये यहाँ कंट्रोल नहीं हुआ ना तो ये हिंदू यहाँ पे भी NWFA में भी आके आप पे कब्जा कर लेंगे. So that is how the Pashtuns are mobilized to go to Kashmir. So you have the Pashtuns, you have the local people of Western Jammu, you have the Muslim League. So everyone is hell-bent to destroy Jammu and Kashmir. Now, 24th, if we see 22nd October or first week of October, you have the Punch rebels as well as the subjects, the Pashtuns, who are about to enter Kashmir. They are about to invade Kashmir, and around 22nd, 23rd, they are within our territory, and 26th, you have the instrument of accession. But by that time, the water has flown so much that the western part of Jammu, that is and because that area comprises of Muslim League and Muslim Conference influenced subject, so that area becomes out of control. 24th, so 2 days before the instrument of accession is signed, 24th of October 47, we have something called Provisional Revolutionary Government of Azad Kashmir. So they knew that India is trying to persuade the Maharaja to sign the instrument of accession. So that's why the political leaders in Western Jammu, they managed to create something called Azad, so-called Azad Jammu and Kashmir. And that is where the Pakistanis get a claim, ye to Azad hai, wo gulam hai. And that's why you see PoK, the broader PoK is divided into two areas. One is in the Pakistani parlance, not my parlance, because I've been questioned a lot. So they call it the so-called Azad Jammu and Kashmir, which is the southern part of PoK, and the northern part is, which is 80% of the area, 80-85%, that's called the Gilgit-Baltistan region. And the present topic of the discussion is the southern part, which the Pakistanis call as Azad Kashmir. Now, how does that play out? That we see, if it was genuinely Azad, if the people were very happy there, what happened? And because they themselves established, obviously with the Pakistani help, something called Azad Kashmir Revolutionary Government. So, aisa kya hua that we see these protests going on? So, the answer to this is the present protests we see today in this form. There was a more radical version of protests happening in the same region in 1950s. But we were not able to, I mean, because of our own reasons, because the political establishment of that day had different priorities. So I'm not going into that. But what I'm trying to point out is that from 1950 onwards, the same thing that you are seeing today, that started happening at a more radical level. And that's what something I want to discuss and link it to what's happening today. So you have the war that goes on between India and Pakistan, and there's a ceasefire. So the present map of Jammu and Kashmir, present border alignments, you see part of it is with the Pakistanis, de facto controlled by the Pakistanis. Now that PoK region, which the Pakistanis mentioned as Azad Kashmir, that comes to the Pakistanis, still UN decides what is to be done. I'm not going into the United Nations, their technicalities and the different commissions they send, but on the political aspect. Now, the person who establishes the Azad Kashmir revolutionary government, the so-called revolutionary government, he becomes the first president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, or PoK, let's mention PoK from this side. His name is Sardar Ibrahim. So Sardar Ibrahim is the poster boy. He's called the Baba Millat, or usko pura ek naam pe, or he gets all the military and civilian honors. He's the one who got Kashmir out of the evil Maharaja's hands. That's the narrative there. And then suddenly all this syllabus from instead of telling about Kashmir's history, the syllabus starts coming from Punjab, where the Dogras are painted as the enemies. But coming to Sardar Ibrahim, who's the president of the first president of that area, by 1950, he's made late 47, he's the president. By 50, he's kicked out. He's removed as the president from the president position because he also realizes that the Pakistani state is actually out to grab that area. But then because he's the poster boy of that movement, he's not able to register a protest in that formal way, because he's the one who got that specific area in alignment with the Pakistani state. And by 1952, you have a major rebellion in making. Now the reason is, so there are multiple. So unlike Jammu and Kashmir, unlike say Kashmir Valley, you have one ethnicity in Kashmir, which is the ethnic Kashmir, right? But in the Western Jammu, which is the Muslim majority areas of Jammu, they have multiple clans. You have the Rajputs, you have the Gujars, you have the Pahadis, Potwaris, you have also this another tribe called the Sudans, which become the Sadhuzais. So I'm sure if you have friends from Jammu, you'll see a lot of people with the name Sudan. So here you have the Sudans from Hindu and the Sikh community, but in that part of Jammu, you have the Sudans which are part of the Muslim community. And over a period of time, the Pakistanis also invented something called ये Sudan ना साधुजाई होता है, because साधुजाई gives it more of a Pakistani sort of a slant. So said ये कोई martial race था जो कहाँ से आया, कहाँ से आया, पता नहीं कहाँ से, but they are martial races. So the Pakistanis invest in the Sudans of the Sudan community of Western Jammu. But nevertheless, आप जितने भी, if you do a homework over the last 70 years, most of the people, most of the politicians in the PoK who have been empowered by the Pakistani state, they come from the Sudan community. They are majorly represented in the Pakistani bureaucracy and the bureaucratic political, even in the military. But then in 1952 itself, after Sardar Ibrahim is kicked out for questioning the ingress of the Pakistani state into PoK, Sardar Ibrahim only launches rebellion. And you'll be surprised to know that from 52, 53, 54, 55, there are parallel governments operating all across PoK. This is something we have failed to know. हमारा तो narrative ये है कि Kashmir was fine till 60s, 70s. 80s में you have certain elections and then you have militancy which comes in the 1990s. But then here you have from 1952 onwards, you have a full-blown rebellion going on. And the rebellion continues for 5 to 6 years. I've been told by the local journalists there that 3,000 to 4,000 Sudan community refugees also took shelter in India, but they were not attended. I mean, there were some reasons. I'm not getting into that, but they appealed to India that we are the ones who are suffering, so we need some help. And I'm talking about 1950s. But then by 1956, the rebellion is quelled. And even the president who's appointed after Sardar Ibrahim's dismissal, he also faces the pressure, he also quits. So this is the level of protests there. Now I'll come to 60s, 70s. So I've explained 50s. And that area, more than Kashmir, this PoK, this part of PoK was the single most disturbed area in ever since independence. Now you come to 1960s and 1970s. Now after the suppression of this, the people from that region, they mobilize themselves into a different sort of a political movement. And that movement kind of it spans across both. It overlaps what's happening in our side of Jammu and Kashmir and what's happening in PoK also. So if you remember, Sheikh Abdullah, when Sheikh was arrested in 1953, his followers started something called plebiscite front. कि हमें तो plebiscite करवाना है जी plebiscite तो पहले तो Sheikh Abdullah was very much pro India, but then when the government senses that what he's up to and the government gets him arrested, his followers start a plebiscite. A similar plebiscite front comes up in the PoK region also, and that's far more politically charged than the one in Jammu and Kashmir. So throughout 1960s, the people from that area also are calling for plebiscite, not in a sense of some sort of an opposition from India, but because they are fed up with the Pakistani state and how the Pakistani state has used the word Azad in order to use up the entire powers, within the use of the powers, both vesting in the hands of both military and civilian leadership. And I will quote some very interesting reports as I share. You have the Communist Party intellectuals who somehow make it to that part of PoK, and they start also talking about some sort of an independent state, some sort of an independence from Pakistan, and they are fed up with the Pakistanis. And that's a more educated class that calls for a very defined political identity for PoK, which again is in opposition to the Pakistanis. And then finally, you have in the 1970s the arrival of Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. So as much as the menace that Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front carried out in the Indian Kashmir, as we know from people like Yasin Malik and the kind of terrorist activities they engaged in, the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, while it took support from the Pakistanis, they were never convinced by the Pakistanis that you should call for the integration of Kashmir into Pakistan. So on the one hand, you have JKLF acting against Indian interests. On the one hand, you have JKLF taking support from the Pakistanis. But at the same time, the JKLF is very much trying to play a very smart game where they are saying that Jammu and Kashmir is independent. And that they are very much acting in connivance with the Pakistanis because that's where their money and their logistics comes from. So I'm sure many of you would be familiar with, say, Maqbool Bhatt, who was hanged by the Indian authorities. So, sir, I got this. There's a journalist called P.N. Jalali, old journalist, Kashmiri journalist. So he had this astute sense of coverage. And throughout 70s, 80s, it was Mr. P.N. Jalali who was reporting on what's happening in Kashmir. So there's a 1971 report that P.N. Jalali makes on Maqbool Bhatt, that what is this guy trying to do? So first of all so Mr. Jalali claims that he's recruited by the Pakistani authorities. His first assignment is the precursor to JKLF, which is KLF, Kashmir Liberation Front. So KLF is the precursor to JKLF. Secondly, he goes to the Tashkent conference, if you recall, after 1965 war, where Shastri ji goes to Tashkent. In 1966, he's sent by the Pakistanis to Tashkent conference as an undercover journalist, attached with the Pakistani leadership in order to sabotage the Tashkent house. And he has the support of Zulfikar Ali. So there's a double game, which in some way, the JKLF leaders are also playing. But then, having said that, with the advent of JKLF, first in the Pakistani side, in the PoK side, and later in the Indian side, now there's a distinct trend where you see the sentiment in the Kashmir Valley, it takes a very strong religious undertone. They, after Ziaul Haq, they morph into, say, Hizbul Mujahideen or, Huji Harkatul Jihadil Islami. So they take a very religious line. But in PoK part, the JKLF is still managing to have its own turf, where it takes support of the Pakistanis, but at some point of time, there are new factions coming out of JKLF. We have someone who starts from JKLF, but he eventually makes his own political party. And this is, and these are the political activists who are the face of the protests that you are seeing in 2023. So the idea that germinates in 70s, which calls for separation of PoK, even from the state of Pakistan, but then that remains dormant because they feel India is a bigger challenge. These people are the ones who are now mobilizing themselves into Awami Action Committee first. You have the Awami Action Committee, which starts some 3 decades ago. And Awami Action Committee is the face of protests in both Gilgit-Baltistan as well as in PoK. But something happens over the 2000 2010 decade that this whole sentiment keeps going, and they morph. They eventually evolve themselves into Joint Awami Action Committee. Now, why this difference? Why do we need a Joint Awami Action Committee when there is an Awami Action Committee which is already doing something? And this is last 10 minutes, sir. So, and this is the change I want to mention. Now, if you recall, last 70 years, what is happening? The first thing is that the narrative over the last 70 years of the PoK residents, which has been fed by both the Muslim Conference from Jammu and Kashmir, which started in the 30s, as well as the Pakistani leadership, the sentiment is that the Maharaja was an enemy of the Muslim people of Jammu and Kashmir. Maharaja बहुत बुरा आदमी. उसके बाद इंडिया बहुत बुरा था क्योंकि इंडिया ने यूएन में जाके सारा प्लान डिरेल कर दिया. But these questions once again open up 10 years ago. That was Maharaja really a bad person, and is India really that bad, or India is really the culprit as our state has fed this narrative? And over the last 10 years, and this is something I also I'll credit our media, our think tanks. And by the way, from late 90s, post 99 Kargil war, when there were interactions happening as part of Musharraf Vajpayee conversations, a lot of delegations came from PoK, a lot of delegations went from India. And this is where there were direct interactions between people from the Indian Kashmir, the activists from Jammu, as well as the activists from PoK. And that's where many realities. Again, this is not Aman Ki Asha, please, don't get me wrong. But this is a separate think tank to think tank interactions going on 2 decades ago. And this is where the activists from the two sides start talking to each other. And there is this realization, ये ऐसा भी नहीं था, the kind of narratives that have been fed by the Pakistani state. And this is where you have 2000, like last 10 years, a new or a change in narrative that evolves into the present political consciousness. Now, what is this political consciousness? The first is that the PoK people have to be dehyphenated from what's happening in Kashmir. जो कश्मीर के लिए हो रहा है, जो पाकिस्तान कर रहा है, वो तो जो कह रहा है that they are doing for the ethnic Kashmiris, right? And ethnic Kashmiris are different from the people from PoK who are again Gujars, who are Rajputs, who are Potwaris, who are Sudans, right? Who are Jats. So this is the first change that we see. That we are not Kashmiris. We are people from this area, and हमारी एक अलग history है. That's the first change. Second change is, if you recall, 10-15 minutes ago, I discussed about the Sudan community, which the Pakistanis mobbed into the Sadhusai. So the second question these people raised is कि भाई सब कुछ Sudan क्यों ले? We are 10 different communities living there. So why should Sudans have all the benefits, and why should they be the state beneficiaries when there are multiple communities living there? This is the second thing. The third most important thing that you see with the coming up of Joint Awami Action Committee is new themes of the protests. What are these new themes? Joint Awami Action Committee was launched in 2023, and the activities, the precursor, the pre-JAAC mobilizations, they started taking place in 2021, 2022, and finally, this is just 1.5 years after application of Article 370. So initially, the Pakistanis tried to mobilize the people from JKLF, PoK. You should, create a human chain, and you should invade. You should create a human chain which crosses the border into Jammu and Kashmir, and we should teach India a lesson. But somehow, within 1.5 years, the narrative completely stands changed. 21, 22, 23. Let's look at the nature of protests. What type of protests are happening in PoK? Earlier, the protests used to be directed against India. India is the, say, oppressor and all. But you have, for the first time in the last few years, you see protests on questioning there is something called 22 October protests. So 22nd October is when the Pakistani invaders, they decide to launch an assault into Jammu and Kashmir, right? So there are protests that question the Pashtun invasion into Jammu and Kashmir, and that's, I think, something which has never taken place in past. So imagine people from PoK questioning the Pakistani state and telling them that because you used a illegal and a violent route to launch an invasion on Kashmir, it is the people of Jammu and Kashmir who lost the narrative. क्योंकि आपने तो invasion करवा दिया, आप तो उछड़ गए वहां पे कश्मीर में. And it is us who never found that representation in both, say, UN or in Pakistan. So this is, the charge levied by the people from PoK. And last thing is, so there's something called 5 February. So 5th February was a call given by Jamaat-e-Islami 35 years ago. In Pakistan, the Islamists of Pakistan decided to mobilize the people of Pakistan against India on Indian policies on Kashmir. So there are protests that question the Pakistani initiatives to brainwash the Kashmiris as well as the people of Pakistan. So this is, I would say, while the demands are very much civic in nature, if you ask me the question, is Joint Awami Action Committee pro-India? Do they want independence? I think that remains to be seen. But the kind of signals that have emerged from the nature of protests and how the protests have changed from pro-Pakistan and pro-ethnic Kashmir to pro-rights of PoK's natives, I think this is the most fundamental change that you will witness in the last 5 years with the establishment of Joint Awami Action Committee. And for the first time, they have been declared as terrorists under the Anti-Terror Act. That's a very, very grave crime which the Pakistani state uses against, say, activists from Balochistan or Sindhi nationalists or the Pashtun nationalists. This is happening now in the PoK region also, that Anti-Terror Act has been, the leaders as well as the party itself has been declared as a terrorist organization. So that itself tells us a lot about the anxieties of the Pakistan state towards what's happening in the PoK. So I suggest